Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. My name is Chris James. I am your host. Tonight we're going to be talking about NASA, also known as Never a Straight Answer. It is July 1st, 2017. Just 3 more days until everybody's favorite holiday, July 4th. That is, if you're into fireworks. This is season number 2, episode 26. Who would have ever thought we'd make it this far? NASA. Never a straight answer. Since long before NASA even existed, the lies and secrets were flying. It would seem as if the very foundation NASA was built on was nothing but shadowy figures and false ideas. NASA is called a civilian space agency. President Dwight D. Eisenhower established NASA in 1958 with a distinctly civilian, as opposed to military, orientation, encouraging peaceful applications in space science. The National Aeronautics and Space Act was passed in July 29, 1958, doing away with NASA's predecessor, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA. The new agency became operational on October 1st, 1958. Have you ever wondered why all of the original astronauts were military pilots? Then there's the whole communications thing. There's the open channel we can all tune into and listen to broadcasts from outer space. We can hear things like
Discovery Houston, 20 seconds to LOS TDRS.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
which you can find on your computer by simply going to NASA Broadcast. But then there are the transmissions NASA wants to keep secret. Things like this one. It's hard to understand because it had to be decrypted. It sounds like the astronauts are saying, Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under the tether. Because the astronauts keep seeing things that NASA wants to hear about, but at the same time they didn't want us to hear, they set up a second transmission channel that is encrypted, so we can't listen in. Does this sound like civilian doings? For a civilian space agency, they sure act an awful lot like the military. Let's go back in time and look at one of the men that was so instrumental in getting the space program off the ground. Literally. Marvel Whiteside Parsons was born 1914 in Los Angeles, California. His family was quite wealthy, and young Marvel was given all the things young rich kids were given. When Marvel Parsons was a teen, his dad decided he wasn't the family type and he left. This kind of left a void in Parsons' life, which was filled by other odd things. Parsons began looking for a father figure elsewhere. When his mother, Ruth, filed for divorce, she began to call her son John instead of Marvel, seeing as he was a junior. This led folks to calling him Jack. A lot of folks named John are called Jack. While growing up, I remember people calling my dad Jack. I have no idea where this comes from. Some folks say Jack Parsons looked into Satan worship. This was quite the thing to do in California back in the 30s and 40s. Marvel, now known as Jack, liked to read Jules Verne novels as well as other science fiction. This led to his fascination with space travel. Parsons was good at combining various chemicals and coming up with explosive fuel to launch rockets into the air. Meanwhile, in Germany, Werner von Braun had also begun looking into chemical rocketry until the only difference was he was using it to propel race cars. A rocket is a fairly simple device. You pack a flammable substance into a less flammable tube, and then you light the end. As the flammable substance burns, it creates a rapidly expanding gas. This gas creates pressure, which sends the tube up into the air. The trick is to get the rocket to go straight up and not spin around and wind up sticking out of a part of your body where it's going to hurt. Also, you need the flammable substance to burn in a controlled manner. Otherwise, you have a bomb instead of a rocket. Lots of people have found out a bomb is not a rocket, and this was usually the last thing they ever learned. Parsons, having money and a mother who allowed him to do just about anything, spent a lot of time out in the backyard shooting small rockets into the air. The small rockets then became bigger rockets, which in turn became huge rockets. It's a good thing they had a huge backyard. They say that the yard was pockmarked with craters from all of his experiments. Along with his friend, Edward Foreman, Parsons wrote dozens of letters to the scientific community, such notables as Robert Goddard and Hermann Oberth and Konstantin Tchaikovsky. After years of writing and reading the responses, these two young men discovered these scientists didn't really have much to add to their rocket experiments. It was Jack who came up with the idea of adding glue to the propellant in order to create a solid rocket fuel. Parsons managed to graduate from high school and he went to a Pasadena junior college, along with his friend Edward. As they moved through colleges and learned more, one day in 1937, Parsons and Foreman attended a lecture on rocketry at Caltech, where they became acquainted with a student named Frank Malina. Malina was a theorist and mathematician studying mechanical engineering at the time. The three men hit it off, seeing as they were all passionate about rocketry. They looked into forming a club at the college. Well, the folks in charge didn't allow it because rockets were all just a bunch of science fiction nonsense. Theodore Van Karman was working at the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratories of the California Institute of Technology. He listened to the trio and thought they just might be on to something. If you take the time to listen to people, even though they might just look and sound crazy, you never know where it might lead. Van Karman was intrigued by the idea of a solid-fueled rocket. No one had ever tried this before. With the backing of such a high and mighty scientist, Caltech decided to finance the club and allow these three to play with their toys. It didn't take long for problems to appear. A misfired rocket in one of the buildings forced the group to move outside of the aeronautics laboratory. They had a concrete platform built where the explosive devices wouldn't damage anything. At least that was the plan. During a rocket test, a piece of metal was hurled through the air, impacting the wall of one of the campus buildings. Van Carmen moved the group out into the desert to avoid any further mishaps or possible fatalities. We're going to take a break here and play a couple commercials. We'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
Though we gotta say goodbye.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. We were just talking about the bizarre rocket experiments being conducted by Parsons and his friends. The Rocket Club became known as the Suicide Club. They did all their experiments in the Arroyo Seco area, close to the Devil's Gate Dam, on the edge of Pasadena. In 1938, the United States Army offered 2 research projects to MIT. One was a windshield de-icing device for aircraft. The second was for a rocket engine to launch small aircraft. MIT got the first pick, and feeling that the research into rocketry was a lot of Buck Rogers science fiction, the rocket development was handed laughingly to the members of the Suicide Club. It was probably believed this would be the last they would see of the club. The first Army rockets were based on regular fuel, which, when set sideways, tended to settle, and this caused the rockets to be very unstable. Parsons had been working with glue to form a solid rocket propellant. The solid rocket propellant was just the thing they needed. The Army found a use for this new rocket as a JATO, or Jet-Assisted Takeoff, and began injecting money into the Suicide Club so they could develop more useful and dangerous rockets. It should have been called a Rocket Assist Takeoff. 1939, Parsons became acquainted with the works of English occultist Aleister Crowley, who had referred to himself as the Great Beast, or 666. He was referred to by the English media as the wickedest man in the world. Parsons became quite enamored with this larger-than-life occultist. Aleister Crowley was the founder of the Thelemic religion, whose practitioners lived by the motto, "Do as thou wilt." He had previously enjoyed some success as a mountaineer, having scaled the K2 and the Kanchenjunga, the second and third highest mountains in the world. During the Kanchenjunga expedition in 1905, Crowley's fellow mountaineers were hit by an avalanche. They called to Crowley for help. And Crowley didn't help for the simple reason it wasn't in his plans for that day. He sat back and drank tea while his fellow mountaineers succumbed to their injuries. Later, Crowley said he had no sympathy for those injured. In 1910, Crowley was admitted to another secret society known as the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. Crowley quickly rose through the ranks and became the leader of the English-speaking fraternity. Although the OTO was modeled on the principles of Freemasonry, once Crowley took over, it quickly became a religion or a cult based on Thelemic teachings. They espoused the ideas of free love, debauchery, and sex magic. Parsons had gotten married to Helen Northrup, as in the Northrop Grumman Company. Together they joined the Pasadena chapter of Crowley's church. Parsons wrote to Crowley and soon became one of Crowley's favorite members. Being a rocket scientist and a cultist soon led to Parsons using his cult teachings and beliefs along with his rocketry. Before each test launch, Parsons would perform a chant and a hymn to Pan. You remember Pan, the half-goat, half-man the devil image was based on? None of his superiors would pay any attention to this weird behavior. As long as the rockets went up, they were happy. I wonder how much of Parsons' success was due to his alternate beliefs. For a lot of folks, shooting rockets into the air is a hobby. They save a little money during work, then they buy a few components. On their days off, they take a drive out to where no one lives and they fire their toys into the air. This is how they enjoy themselves. Well, Jack Parsons managed to turn his fascination with rocketry into a lucrative career. Once the Army Air Corps got their hands on the JTOs, money began pouring into Parson and his club. 1942, the club became the Aerojet Engineering Corporation in order to meet the demands of production. Aerojet, but no jets. Then in 1943, seeing the true value of the Galsite rocket project, the military took over operations and they changed the name to Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It didn't seem to matter there were no jet engines anywhere to be found. They designed and built rockets. Nobody wanted to use the term rocket because it was still associated with science fiction. Just go back and watch some of those old cheesy movies where the rocket is flying through outer space and smoke is billowing from the tail. So they went with Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also known as JPL, or the Jack Parsons Lab. The lab was built next to the Devil's Gate Dam, right where Parsons and the Suicide Club had been moved back in 1937. During the course of the war, the Army began to worry about Jack's reputation as a hedonist and occultist, so they convinced him to sell his shares of Aerojet. Parsons took the money from the government and used it, and his time, to delve deeper into the occult. Parsons, going under his mantra of do as thou wilt, began an affair with his wife's sister. Helen did as she wilt and ran away with Wilfred Smith, the cult's leader. This allowed Jack to move in and take over as the head cult guy. One of Jack Parsons' fellow occult members was L. Ron Hubbard. Yes, that guy. And he was his brother-in-law to boot. But we're not going to get into that. The cult had decided to create a new age of freedom and enlightenment. They would do this by performing the Babylon Working. The Babylon Working is a series of magic ceremonies or rituals performed from January to March of 1946 by the rocket scientists and the occultist Jack Parsons and his fellow cultists. This ritual was designed and performed in order to manifest an incarnation of the divine feminine called Babylon. The project was based on the idea of Aleister Crowley and his description of a similar project in his 1917 novel Moonchild. The first stage of Babylon involved invoking an elemental mate. They performed the ceremony, and lo and behold, Marjorie Cameron showed up out of nowhere. Jack thought she was his creation. She was actually a young starlet who hung out with anyone she thought could further her career. Flush with the thrill of success, Parsons and Cameron wasted no time performing the second part of the ritual that was supposed to create the Moonchild. The name Moonchild sounds either the offspring of two hippies or one of Frank Zappa's kids. However, this Moonchild was to be their homunculus. A homunculus is a small human being that is created fully formed. The homunculus would then do anything its creators wished.
I shall call him Mini-Me.
When Aleister Crowley got wind of what Parsons and Cameron were about to do, Crowley became enraged. I don't know if it was because he'd never tried to create his own homunculus or he thought it might just be too dangerous, but Crowley tried to stop them. Before the homunculus could be summoned or formed or popped into being, Parsons found he had spent just about all of his money. He was close to bankruptcy. As a get-rich-quick scheme, Parsons handed $20,000 over to someone who claimed he could double his money. If I had $20,000, I sure wouldn't be feeling bankrupt, but some folks are higher maintenance than me. The money, along with his friend and current wife, all headed south into Mexico. Parsons performed a weather ritual, which he said formed a huge storm that drove the man with his money and runaway wife ashore and into the arms of the authorities. Eventually, Parsons got his $20,000 back. Now, did he really conjure up a storm, or was it just a coincidence? I don't really believe in coincidence. Parsons now found himself without a job, home, or wife. He did still have the $20,000, but that didn't last long. He busied himself writing a book, blaming all of his troubles on the guy who supposedly stole everything from him and how unfair life could be. The homunculus never appeared, as far as we know. Parsons turned to small jobs, repairing washing machines and designing pyrotechnics for Hollywood movies. Using his past reputation, Parsons secured a contract as a chemical researcher for Hughes Aerospace. This newfound position of authority didn't last very long. In 1950, the FBI investigated Parsons for the theft of documents from the Hughes Corporation. The investigations revealed that Parsons had been planning to exchange stolen rocket plans with the newly founded Israeli government in exchange for Jack being admitted into Israel. Whether the Israeli government was in on this, we don't know, but that was Jack's plan anyway. The FBI also got wind of some of Parsons' weirder ideas when it came to light. Jack wanted to hurry up the apocalypse. He wanted the end of civilization to come so the next new and wonderful world could come about. The G-men began circling Parsons like a flock of buzzards. Jack still had a fascination with rockets and blowing things up. He got busy in his lab trying to create a new solid fuel to be used in rocketry. In 1952, the neighborhood was rocked and bits and pieces of Jack Parsons was scattered about when he accidentally, or maybe not, blew himself up. The very same day, upon hearing of the death of her son, Parsons' mother, Ruth, took her own life with a deliberate overdose of Nembutal. Once Jack was no longer there to object, the works of Parsons were systematically expunged from the academic papers stored at Caltech. At first he became a footnote in the technical papers, and as time progressed, the footnote disappeared as well. Today, JPL is a major part of NASA. Back when I was a youngin', we had a house just off Calder Road in League City. We stayed there on occasion, but we moved around a lot so our dad could find work, his being a bricklayer. Calder Road was just a gravel path that led from Highway 3 to Interstate 45. It's called the League City Parkway today. There were maybe 6 or 8 houses clustered around our end of the road, and then there's one big house down at the other. The house had a great big pond next to it. The pond used to be a gravel pit, but it had filled in with water. Rumor had it there was still a steam shovel parked at the bottom of the pit. The place looked pretty nice any time we would drive by and admire it. The man living there worked for NASA. He was one of their rocket scientists. Robert Abel was one of NASA's best engineers, and he was going to get us to the moon. Towards the end of the 60s, young women kept vanishing all along the area between Houston and Galveston. This stretch of highway is known as the Corridor of Death today. The first body that most folks associate with what is called the Texas Killing Field was found in 1971. Living in that area, I had heard something about a few bodies being found much earlier, but I was pretty young at the time. Brenda Jones, just 14 years old, from Galveston. She was last seen in July 1st, 1971. Her body was discovered the next day in Galveston Bay. She had been shot with a .22. Then bodies began to show up in the oil field just west of League City, right on the other side of Calder Road. At first, everybody thought it was a coincidence, but soon authorities began to suspect some, if not all, of the victims might be from the same person. The FBI was asked for a profile, and they came up with a description that matched very few of the area residents. And we're going to take a break here and play a couple commercials. We'll be right back, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Eater B Day, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
Though we gotta say goodbye.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
Every day.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. As the police began to sift through all the details, they began to suspect one man in particular. Not just some guy living in a trailer on the side of a dirt road, but Robert Abel, the engineer working at NASA, which was just across Clear Lake. The detective in charge of the case went to question Abel, since he lived right across the highway from where most of the bodies were found. Abel got very mad when asked about any information he might have to help solve the case. Abel then called the mayor, and next he called his bosses at NASA. The story goes at some point in the investigation, Washington called the League City Police Department and told them to back off. Robert Abel was instrumental in getting us to the moon, and he was still needed for the space program. Now, I can't be too critical about the Washington folks getting involved. There was zero, as in nothing, tying Abel to any of the crimes. His house had already been searched. His property had been searched. He had been questioned. Nothing ever came out to tie him to one, let alone any of the 40 murders, all found along the corridor of death. No one knows how many bodies there actually are still buried in the field west of League City. As the city grew, the field became part of the town. A housing development was put in on the north end of the field, and my mother bought a house there. 1984, a dog brought home a human skull he had found while doing dog things near the home. Heidi Villarreal Fay, a 23-year-old cocktail waitress who had been reported missing 6 months earlier. They managed to search the field and eventually found the rest of her. Part of the field is now businesses or houses. There is still a huge tract of undeveloped land. As for Robert Abel, he died under mysterious circumstances shortly after being questioned by the police. There have been a few convictions of men who killed a few of the victims, but a vast majority are still being laid at Abel's feet. 1969. We did it. We put a man on the moon. Well, 2 actually. And then we got him back home safe and sound. And then things get a little weird. A lot of photos and videos were taken of the moon landing, as well as while the command module circled overhead. Just the video was called the most spectacular and costly movie ever made. I got to watch it on TV back in the 6th grade. We all had to sit in the hallway on the floor and watch a TV that was sitting at the other end of the hall. The images were kind of scratchy and lots of snow, but we saw this historical event. It was noon, and I was hungry. Why was the image so bad? NASA had no way to broadcast a video from the moon to a TV station. So they placed a TV camera in front of their video monitor. The camera took in the black and white image and sent it out from Australia. We got to watch a copy of a copy of a copy. But not to worry. NASA had the original footage, and they would be more than happy to show it whenever they got around to it. Then somebody decided we didn't need all that film from the moon, so they re-recorded over it. Most expensive film ever shot. NASA, that was literally swimming in tax dollars, decided to save a few bucks by reusing film. I'm all for saving money, but hey, how about asking the rest of us before you destroy such an important movie? I'm just surprised they never recorded over the Zapruder film. And how about all those still photographs taken by Armstrong and Aldrin? At least they didn't erase those. No, instead, NASA had a department whose job it was to look at each and every frame and airbrush out anything they didn't think we should see. The guys in charge didn't want the taxpayers to see anything odd like, oh, say, a UFO or maybe structures on the moon. You can still find a few photos out there that show anomalies caught by civilians who spend days, weeks, and months going over any photos they can get. Once a photo is discovered, NASA wastes no time going back to the original and covering up anything they missed the first time. You've seen the image of the face on Mars, right? If not, what are you waiting for? Go have a look and see what everybody else has been talking about. The image has been shown on TV a lot. It was published on the cover of Parade magazine. What most folks don't know is Carl Sagan told everybody the photo had been doctored to make it look like a face. He went on to explain all about how the light hit the formation, casting light at just the right angle, and then, with just a little skill, the mound was made into a face. Except it wasn't touched up. What you saw was what the camera had caught as it passed over the surface of Mars back in 1975. The arguments began. Some folks said this was proof of life on Mars, while others said this was proof of how gullible some people could be. So NASA finally decided to go have another look. 1992 Mars Observer was going to pass directly over the face and give us a good look. Oh, but wait. NASA announced just before the launch that any and all photos taken would not be shown to the public until NASA decided it was time to share. What? Wait a minute. Who's paying all those tax dollars so those guys at NASA could fly around taking pictures of things? They did say they would show us the photos someday, maybe. The Mars Observer was launched and it flew to Mars just like it was supposed to. As it was getting close, NASA switched off the telemetry. That's the electronic signal going to and coming from the spacecraft. Then, nobody said anything for about 14 hours. Finally, NASA came out with the announcement the Mars Observer was missing. It was lost, just like all the footage of Armstrong and Aldrin, vanished like Jimmy Hoffa. Later, a whistleblower came forward saying the Mars Observer had to be inspected just before the launch, and the inside was full of dust and debris. If you ever look at images of the technicians working on those spacecraft, you'll notice they all wear suits with face masks. That's not for the tech's protection. It's to keep dirt and debris out of the spacecraft. Where did all that dust come from? NASA says it was blown in by a storm. Dry dust blown in by a very wet storm. Well, NASA somehow managed to lose 2 more multi-million-dollar spacecraft, all en route for Mars. They were batting zero for a while there. Finally, to put an end to all the arguing, NASA sent another orbiter to fly by and photograph the face. April 5, 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor flew over Cydonia, where the face was first seen, and snapped a few photos, which immediately were hustled into the lab and touched up to make the face look like anything but a face. The craft circled the planet and took a few photos, and NASA, in their magnanimous generosity, released one that showed the face on Mars for what it was, or rather, what they wanted us to think it was. Richard C. Hoagland called it the cat's box photo. It does look like a cat's box just before I clean it out. The image is so nasty and grainy looking you can't make out much of anything. It sure did not look like a high-tech camera had been used. Until you used computer imaging to turn it into a 3D image, then once more it looks just like a face. The boys at NASA had smashed it down to make it look just like desert. Now you might just ask, why would NASA be in such a big hurry to disguise and airbrush images, wouldn't they be all hot and sweaty trying to prove there is life out there? And not if you go back and read the Brookings Institute report from 1959. In it, they advised NASA to hide any and all alien artifacts found because of proof of life outside our planet will lead to the total breakdown in society. Fear that if people find out we're not alone will cause people to stop thinking of themselves as Americans or Russians, but as Earthlings instead, all united against outside forces. We can't have that. Those who want to rule the world would find it hard if all of us started working together. So NASA continues receiving images back from the Mars Global Surveyor and storing them away as if something of national security had been found on this distant planet. Thousands of photos taken and only a handful ever released. Well, once in a great while, some politician will wake up from his nap and do something right. John McCain actually did something for the taxpayers. Maybe he was up for re-election at the time. He told NASA if they ever wanted to get any more tax money, they had better start to produce. Suddenly, thousands of photographs came pouring out from the NASA vaults. Some of them were rather bizarre. Richard C. Hoagland found one that shows what looks like a mile-long, hundreds of feet wide tube running along the surface of Mars. I've looked at this image and there's no other thing this could be. Well, maybe it could be a plastic toy discarded by some Mars kid. The kid would have to have been rather big. It looks as if NASA was so worried about the threat from McCain, they just dumped the photos before they could airbrush out any anomalies. If you'd like to see the photo, just go to the Enterprise mission homepage and have a look, or you can search for glass tubes on Mars. There are quite a few out there. Next, how about the whole global warming craze we went through? It turns out most, if not all, the NASA data used to show we're heating things up around here was manipulated. There's a nice way of saying those turkeys lied to us. Using publicly available data from NASA, retired geologist and data computation expert Professor Carl Ewert made this discovery. Between the years of 2010 and 2012, the data measured since 1881 were altered so they could show a significant warming, especially after 1950. A comparison of the data from 2010 with the data of 2012 shows that NASA GISS had altered its own data set so that, especially after World War II, a clear warming trend appears, even though it never existed. Thus, the issue of man-made global warming has taken on a whole new meaning. Yes, it's always man-made if the data are adjusted to fit the theory. The meticulous work of Ewert has exposed a series of scandalous and contradictions that are simply being ignored by the political supporters of man-made climate change. When and who was it that started this whole global warming lie? Let's have a look at history. The U.S. experienced a severe heat wave and a drought during the summer of 1988. The Mississippi River was way lower than seemed possible. Barges couldn't get up the river. Boats were being forced to go to dock farther downstream than normal. Yellowstone Park was burning up, with wildfires in a third of the park. This was the perfect time for James Hansen to start the global warming scam. He went before Congress and said he was 99% certain the heat wave was due to CO2 emissions and that heat waves would get much worse starting in the 1990s. Hansen checked with the National Weather Service to see which days were considered to be the hottest on a yearly basis. That day was supposed to be June 6th through the 9th. So the first hearing on global warming were scheduled for June. Next, Hansen and his fellow co-conspirator, Senator Tim Wirth of Colorado, went in and opened all the windows so the hot air could permeate the building. The next day, when testimony was to be given, all the news agencies brought in all their cameras with those really hot lights, and they filled the room with more heat. This caused everybody sitting around to sweat and to look as if the end of the world was just 2 years away. Well, just like those folks at the Weather Channel, his predictions were wrong. Instead of the years getting hotter, we hit a bit of a cooling off period. So Hansen claimed this was due to the fact that the United States wasn't following along with the global weather like it should, which was due to global warming. And with that confusing statement, we're going to take a break, play a couple commercials, and drink some coffee. So we'll be right back. Don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
Though we gotta say goodbye.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
Every day in a letter, sealed with a kiss.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And now back to this global warming thing. When the weather began to cool off instead of steadily climbing as he predicted, Hansen began to mess with the weather data. He would haul out huge graphs showing how the temperature was going up when in fact it was going down. Once it became apparent that Hansen was lying, he changed his tune and began preaching about global climate change. We call it weather. If you're sitting there wondering why this scam was tried on the public, just follow the money. Ask yourself, who would benefit from this scheme? Let's see. Politicians who would invest in green energy companies and then pass laws saying you have to use these products to combat the end of the earth. Go look at the palaces these folks live in and count the solar panels. You might find this hard since not a one have any solar panels. Have a look at their neighborhoods. See all those wind turbines? Oh yes, they don't have any either. They tell us we have to cut down on everything we do so the elitists can continue doing as they always do. All those celebrities who all espouse global warming as they flew all over the planet in their private jets. Since when have celebrities known how to turn off a faucet, let alone fix the planet? Then there's the UN with their carbon tax. The UN has been known to misappropriate millions of dollars, and what better way to fill their private bank accounts than with our money? So why would NASA get involved in this scheme? They already get way too much money as it is, and what with their track record of losing spacecraft, I would tell them to use their own money, and if they get it right, we'll reimburse them. NASA as a whole is not into scams. The space agency is there to explore space. To boldly go, well, that was another show. No, what I think happened was somebody higher up in the organization was buddies with politicians that were making a killing investing in green energy. And their good friends asked them to fudge the numbers a bit so they could all get rich. In other words, lie to us, and then take our money under false pretenses. Who says the snake oil salesmen are gone? No, they just moved into government offices. So next time some guy in a $1,000 suit tells you you need to cut down in order to save the planet, try not to listen. If you think our elected leaders would never lie, let me just name one character: Nixon. Between February 2001 and March 2002, Gary McKinnon from London, England, wanted to know all about the NASA's secret files. Being a computer guy, he went about sneaking into the computers at Johnson Space Center and looking for evidence of things like free energy suppression and cover-ups of UFO activity, as well as other technologies that he felt would be potentially useful to the public. He managed to hack into 16 NASA computers, as well as dozens of U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as Department of Defense computers. Were all of our best security folks that bad that a guy from London could just gain access so many times and to so many so-called secure computers? Or was he far better at technology than they thought that they were? He looked at all the files he thought might give him the answers he sought. In one file, he found a photograph of a huge flying craft that he said resembled a cigar. Now keep in mind, a saucer, seen from the side, would resemble a cigar. It had been taken somewhere over the northern hemisphere. He also stumbled onto a list of officers, all with military designations, who were listed as being part of the U.S. Space Command. Last time I looked, we didn't have a Space Command, but then there are a lot of things out there we don't know about. There were also lists of craft that did not belong to our Navy. He said, I found a list of officers' names under the heading Non-Terrestrial Officers. It doesn't mean little green men. What I think it means is not Earth-based. I found a list of fleet-to-fleet transfers and a list of ship names. I looked them up. They weren't U.S. Navy ships. What I saw made me believe they have some kind of spacecraft off-planet. He also found evidence that NASA technicians were altering photographs to hide the existence of flying saucers. Benjamin Franklin said, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Yes, he said this while he and hundreds of fellow revolutionaries were making secret plans to break free from England. Just because he said it doesn't make it a fact. On December 14, 2012, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, announced that McKinnon would not be prosecuted in the United Kingdom because of the difficulties involved in bringing a case against him when the evidence was all in the United States. McKinnon is accused of committing the biggest military computer hack of all times, and had he been convicted in the U.S., he could have faced up to 70 years in prison and up to $2 million in fines. Seeing as the crime was committed in the United States, but the criminal was in England, it would be impossible to get a proper conviction. He didn't break any laws in England, and he wasn't in the U.S. Next time you get that phone call from the prince in Ethiopia who wants to send you millions of dollars, forget calling the FBI. I tried. They don't have jurisdiction in other countries, despite what you might see in the movies. I believe the reason prosecution was dropped is because if they had gone ahead, somebody would have wanted to see the evidence McKinnon had found. Show us the files he stole. This would have led to the disclosure of something NASA was dying to keep secret. 1969, when Apollo 11 touched down on the moon, the United States declared victory in the space race. We had beat the Russians. Our space technology was better than the Soviets. Our rocket scientists beat their rocket scientists. Men like Wernher von Braun. Well, he's actually a German rocket scientist. And Konrad Donenberg, who was a major general in the Army of the Third Reich. He was a senior artillery commander and had personal contact with Hitler. Now, how about Kurt Heinrich Dubus? Okay, he did belong to the SS before coming to the U.S. There were 118 German engineers and scientists brought into the space program immediately after World War II. All these scientists had been brought to the United States during Operation Paperclip. All of their personal files had been revised by the OSS so they could be snuck into the country, despite President Truman saying no Nazis would be allowed. But hey, we beat the Russians. Well, our Nazi scientists beat the Russians. Our Nazis beat such men as Helmut Gottrup, Kurt Magnus, Dr. Blatzig, and Dr. Hotch. They don't sound very Russian. They don't sound Russian at all. In fact, they sounded like a bunch of Germans. They were also a bunch of Nazis. This would lead me to believe our Nazis beat the Russians' Nazis to the moon. The so-called space race was a competition between two groups of Germans, Nazi scientists, to see who could get to the moon first. The story was von Braun and his fellow scientists weren't really Nazis. They just pretended so they could use all those slave laborers to build their rockets and play with them by sending the rockets high in the sky and accidentally dropping them on London, killing hundreds of people. Just search for von Braun, New Mexico, and you'll see a photograph of our German rocket scientists all gathered round out front of their desert nightclub. Hanging out front is a sign that says, Billy the Kid Curio Shop. Right in the middle is a swastika. This photo was taken after the United States had defeated the German army. A funny thing about the end of World War II in Europe, when Admiral Donitz surrendered to the Allies, he surrendered the German military. The Nazis considered themselves separate from the military. Nobody in the Nazi Party ever surrendered their soldiers. They all either ran for Argentina or they committed suicide. So it would seem that the Nazis won the space race. That just sounds wrong. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. It did destroy a few myths about our space program, but if it really happened this way, we should all know the truth. If you'd like to hear our past shows, you can find them at strangethings.podomatic.com. You can also listen on iTunes. Just search for Strange Things Podcast. And we're on TuneIn as well as Podcast Junkie. If you'd like to contact us, our email address is strangethings@arkanasa.com. Next Saturday, we're going to be talking about mysteries of the Grand Canyon.
Are you are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? This ain't murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?